So, hi everyone, welcome. It's been really awkward standing here for the past 5 minutes waiting and twiddling my thumbs for the proper time to start, but I figured it would be at least polite on account of other people coming in roughly at this time. But yeah, I'm going to be telling you the story of effectively, what I'm currently working on, big picture stuff, and how this might, not just be big picture stuff, but real world things as well. So yeah, hi, I'm Eemeli, and I think it's time that I admit to myself and possibly other people that I'm a bit of a localization nerd. I got kind of sidetracked into all of this about a decade ago, and now Mozilla is paying me money to work on localization systems. Really here at this conference though, I'm primarily coming from my role as a maintainer of the MessageFormat project and through the stuff that I've been doing there. A lot of what I'm talking about here is really about message formatting. Intl.MessageFormat in the title might have been hopefully a bit of a hint towards that. I try to be active also in the OpenJS Foundation stuff, and through them and also through Mozilla, I'm active and representing these entities and, well, myself in a number of internationalization and adjacent working groups and so on. And here really, I'm trying to present some of the interesting stuff that we're currently working on that is like almost real, but not quite like here yet, and what that might be, leading up to. So with localization, we currently are in a situation where, honestly, most solutions kind of work. And for most of the things, you don't need to do much in order to get sufficiently good results. So we're talking about solving things on the edges of really what's required and what's possible. But those can be really fascinating and important and significant edges that we're trying to solve for. Because really, localization can be much more and much greater than what it is today, and can enable much more interesting things. And to be clear, message formatting itself is not just about localization. It's about capabilities that we can have in the interfaces that we build for how does a computer communicate with a human and how all of this works. And the edges are important also because in many ways, I believe quite strongly that the localization really is about inclusion and accessibility of making the thing you're building accessible and usable by everyone, for various definitions of everyone. So yeah, all of that where we are could be, of course, improved. That's like the case for everything, anywhere, in any case. But specifically, I think we can make, and we are making, web content and other related things more easy to localize, more easy to format, more easy for us to build applications that communicate humanely to their human users. And a part of that is enabling messages that we are formatting not just to be strings, but to be possibly complex objects like HTML structures or any generic type of structure that is different in the different languages and locales to which we format things. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this is going to enable us to make the products, the services, everything we build accessible by everyone. Now, the sort of thing that I'm going to be talking about presenting here, of what I'm currently largely working towards, is this sort of localization that we have here. So at the top there we have a short fragment of HTML effectively. I nicked it mostly from Wikipedia, saying that Helsinki is the capital of Finland. I happen to come from Helsinki, Finland, hence kind of picking to me an obvious choice here. So the middle message there, Helsinki on Suomen pääkaupunki, is the same message in Finnish. And it's got not just the text is different, but also the URL to which the link is leading there is different. The last message there, which I'm not gonna try and pronounce, is the same thing again in Swedish. Finland is a bilingual country, so okay, really, I mean, technically we are Finnish and Swedish, but practically speaking, Finland feels more like a bilingual Finnish and English country these days, because everyone speaks English, and when I meet my Swedish friends, we speak English together. But in this case, you're saying that the same message can be represented in many different ways, in different languages, and words that you might not initially think of as needing translation, such as the name of the city, is different in Swedish. It's Helsingfors. I pronounced that one badly, sorry. But going on. So jumping actually quite a bit far ahead. So what I'm really here presenting is that this isn't, we're not stuck in having messages like this that go as streams like this to translators and then become a part of some static HTML. This is not the reality that we should be forced to operate in. It's close to what we actually have at the moment, but it could be better. So really, this is more the sort of structure that I'm currently working towards. And I'm kind of jumping many steps ahead here. Really, I'm showing you the start and then I'm really showing you the end result. But hopefully, I'll be able to show you what this all means and how we get here and what does this, the sort of bigger picture really mean. And to start off here, we've got, so we have an HTML file. And if we add a couple of meta head elements to it, we can create a reference from there saying that, okay, for localization purposes, you're gonna possibly have some content and that's gonna be in a number of different paths. The syntax here that you're seeing is very much under development and not actually, this part isn't part of any proposals anywhere, but it's kind of giving an idea. So here we're saying that the content could be L10N. L10N is short for localization because, it's too long a word, so we make it shorter, and of course we're about making things easy to communicate, and L10N apparently is very easy to communicate, right? Because raise your hand if you've actually heard the term L10N before. That's about like half or maybe a bit under half, which is what I expect. In any case. So then the second part, the link there is saying, okay, there's a localization resource that is related to this content that we have here. A bit like we can have style sheet links in HTML. And it's saying messages.mf. And here specifically, it's not saying, it's not encoding the language into the path there, but that's then included with the meta stuff, and then information coming from outside of what I'm displaying here, saying that in this case, we want to look at Finnish language content. So we end up resolving those two data points together to be able to, actually three data, the base path, the asset path, and then the current locale that we are, and we end up with our file path L10N/fi/messages.mf. And we, as with CSS, we would fetch both of these together, and then when we encounter something like an L10N ID in an element in the structure, we would know that, hey, we're looking for a message with the identifier Helsinki. And that would be then provided in the message resource file. Now, there are complexities here, many of them, and intricacies and details, and I'm going to skip most of those. One key thing to note here that, for example, the translate attribute is a real thing currently in HTML, but you can only have yes and no values here. I'm giving it a new value all here, and that's telling this whole system that the href value is actually a localizable attribute of this element in this particular case. Because actually in most cases, you don't want your localizers being able to edit dangerous things like where your links lead. You might want to just have them edit the text and localizable content. But in this case, we're saying, hey, the link here, the link target here, that's also should be considered a localizable thing, and hence we end up with being able to have links to different language Wikipedia pages. But yeah, so to continue this Socratic dialogue, because I've got this mental image of what I think you're thinking about. You're not really, but I'm thinking you ought to be thinking and asking these questions. So I'm gonna just answer the questions that I think you should be asking. And what's the format of this message resource file? And how's this gonna work in all of the places like browsers and Node.js and elsewhere? And how do I use it from the React or other front-end app that I'm doing? And fundamentally, the answer to this, as to quite a few questions, is to standardize all the things. Make it so that we define how we do these things at the appropriately deep level, so that we don't end up with all of the custom solutions. Because right now, we have a lot of solutions out there in the world for localization. Many of them are decent. I mean, honestly, most use cases, real-world use cases for applications, can just deal with and produce decent results with having strings that are translated directly from one-to-one. But it's the edge cases, the interesting places that I would like us to be able to go to and to go further along those paths. So, the specific standards that I'm currently mostly working on here, the lot of time is currently being spent in a Unicode consortium subgroup of the CLDR TC. CLDR is the Common Language Data Repository. It's Unicode is not just about the fonts and not just about the UTF-8, UTF-16 and everything. Unicode standardizes a surprising number of things with respect to how do we really do localization in the real world. The ICU set of libraries that are used across practically all operating systems and browsers are what's internally powering a lot of localization. And within that scope, we are working to basically get together what is the format for a single message, and then after that, what is the format for a whole resource of messages that are all linked together. What I showed you before, the HTML stuff and so on, that's not yet being worked on by any specific group, but it'll end up in W3C or WhatWG. We're calling it DOM localization currently. We have quite a few ideas of what it should look like, but that is not an actual spec yet. And then finally, Intl.MessageFormat is currently at stage 1 in TC39. And once we get things a little bit further along in the Unicode work, we can take the JavaScript Intl.MessageFormat things also further. Now, when we're doing a thing that is potentially as big as what we're doing here, it's important to note that we're not just about building the shiny new world. And you know, if you come and play and do your things as we are saying you ought to, then you get all these shiny things. What we want to build is a complex and fully supporting system that can provide tools and utility to the existing world that we have in, the existing applications and services and pages and structures that currently are out there, by effectively not just providing a full stack solution, but also providing APIs in the middle of it to plug into. So for instance, when you have a current application that's running and presenting and localizing content, many of them, which are not just doing string-to-string replacement, end up needing to do some sort of some level of parsing to the message language that they're using. And they need to, for this, deploy a parser into the runtime. They need to do the parsing in the runtime and need to do many complicated steps in the runtime. we can offer to offload part or most or all of that into effectively the browser or whatever is the engine that you're running your code in. And that's kind of cool, I think. And this will enable more of the full localization stack to be shared across different implementations rather than everyone needing to reinvent the wheel, because there are so many corner cases here. So many of them only come up when you hit them and then you realize, oh good grief, I made this whole architectural structural decision really early on, and that's made things now really complicated. So we'd like to make that not such a common occurrence. So what we are doing here is adding, as I mentioned, the message format to parser eventually to be a part of the browser DOM and to JavaScript itself. And I mean, eventually, really, I'm skipping ahead. I call this talk the road to Intl.MessageFormat because that I figured was, cool title. But really, I'm not talking about just a road to Intl.MessageFormat, but what's beyond that as well let's look at where we can do localization without necessarily even doing any JavaScript in order to have that happen. Also on the way, it's kind of cool to realize that since JSON.parse, this is potentially the first addition of a new parser into JavaScript, the language, which, I think is cool. But yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, the support for all of this is effectively coming from a shared set of libraries that the Unicode Consortium maintains and that are used by everyone. So localization and internationalization is this weird scope where everyone's realized that by working together, we get better results for everyone. And this is not such a big feature that it makes sense to try for any one actor to get a big competitive advantage by doing so much of it and ending up with different results. At least at the moment. So what's out there? So what do we get from doing all of this work? And one of the interesting things here is indeed the ability to move from not localizing just strings, which might include HTML syntax, to localizing structures and encoding within the syntax that we have an understanding of what these structures are and being able to communicate these structures to localizers as well. Because translators, localizers are not developers. This is So message format 2, which we're working on, is an interesting language because it's not enough for us to get developers to understand it. We need to build it in a way that we can trust that translators and localizers will be able to also work with it and take into account many of the lessons we've learned with what we've seen with the current and past message formatting solutions, which make some of these aspects difficult, and take steps, take actions to avoid the pitfalls that we know of, and hopefully find new mistakes to make, and also hopefully not too bad mistakes. So we're looking to make it easy to make the right choices. We're looking to make it easy for the solution that's kind of obvious and default, for that to take into account all of the weird corner cases of languages that people just don't think about, because there's so many things in our lives we think of as normal. And language is a thing that is encoded so deep in our brain that we can't help but get stuck in ways of presuming that this is, of course, how things work. And each one of us is coming from a different background. Many of us, I hope all of us, speak English, but many of us speak possibly one or more other languages as well, and these just work completely differently. And being able to account for these differences, and also be able to account for situations that we can't imagine, and figure out a base set of tools that can, even solve problems that we can't imagine yet, is challenging. But it's what I've been working on quite a bit for the past 2 years and quite a bit before then as well. So yeah. And this might sound, some of it, like, I'm showing you HTML that doesn't exist yet and other things. And the key thing here is that a lot of this already exists. Not the exact markup I showed you, but the structures that I showed you, this is already how at Mozilla we localize Firefox. We already have, with Project Fluent, a full set of a language that is different from MessageFormat 2, but is performant and able to do this sort of message translation and there's interesting things where effectively, because we're working towards getting the localization not to be imperative, but to be reactive. The desire is great to get the rest of the world to be able to enjoy this as well. So which is a large driver for why I, through Mozilla, am working towards all of these standards and specifications. And the work in Unicode is currently aiming to be able to provide a tech preview of the message formatting parts of this in ICU 72. That's not a promise, but that's what we're aiming for currently. So that'll be sometime in the fall. And as I mentioned, the Intl.MessageFormat proposal is proceeding in TC39, and the other parts are advancing as well. If you want to kind of jump ahead, Project Fluent provides a lot of this world already. It is specifically not a standard or a specification, but given that I'm responsible for that and I'm working on these standards and Mozilla's already built Firefox to use Fluent, if you're interested, it's a safe direction in which to take a jump because you can trust that we have a problem once the next thing comes available of needing to get from here to there. So we're going to have tooling that anyone using Fluent will be able to use as well. I mean, all of what I've mentioned is out there in the open, mostly on various GitHub repositories. And so my contact details are there, and the slides for this talk are available through that link. And I'm really happy if I've managed to exhaust all your questions, but I'm also very happy to answer any of them if you have such.
How do you account for the problem that certain languages are more verbose than others? So for instance, something that takes 5 words in English can take many more words in other languages.
The question was, how do we account for the verbosity of languages? This ends up effectively meaning that we need to, within the messages, so what I showed here, the Helsinki is, what we can do is attach metadata to this file. Effectively, as a current plan is to have a structured metadata comment attached to this, so that when we are passing this information, for example, to localizers in the view that they get of this message, they'll be told some contextual information about the original message and be able to work with that. But we can, when parsing that same file for processing in a runtime, we won't need to work with it. Yes, we might end up, the localizer might have submitted a content that is much longer, and then we might have a problem, but hopefully that'll be caught and complained and possibly errored by linters and other systems on the way. They'll be able to use the metadata that we can encode in the resource file format. This is one of the reasons why we're working on a resource format for messages, because exactly this, being able to have a comment that explicitly is bound to a specific message for the maximum length, for instance, is not an ability that is actually available in current solutions for message resources.
That message format file that potentially gets downloaded by the browser, right? And can have potential large size. Are there any early thoughts about loading strategies of those kind of files?
The question was, if the message files, message resources are getting quite large, are there loading strategies and other concerns there? So a couple of different parts to the answer here. One is that we are hoping that by being able to effectively have multiple different, so I'm showing you here one link element. But as with, for example, CSS, which is a very good comparison here, we can have multiple different resources that we can use in a single file. So we can end up with the sort of common messages used, for example, by all the pages of the application or so on, being in one resource, and the messages for a specific page being in a different resource. So we end up loading and caching across pages one resource and having other resources that are page specific, or split otherwise, whatever seems the best choice. And then also by developing this within the context of how we are already doing the sorts of resource loading, like CSS loading and others, we'll be able to make use of the same sorts of abilities that runtimes have for their caching and prioritization. Any more questions?
So, what if the data that you're kind of displaying that needs to be localized is kind of more dynamic than this, right? Kind of coming from some responses and stuff like that. How would that kind of like play in with kind of the format here?
If I understand the question right, you're asking how, when the messages are more dynamic, how would that really work? That's one of the wonderful levels of detail here that I left out on purpose. Yes, we have thoughts on that, like messages being able to take in parameters and placeholders that are then formatted specifically. And there's a syntax for selectors. So, for instance, when you have a message saying you have 1 apple or 3 apples, there would be a selector choosing, depending on the pluralization rule and case, whether which variant is being shown here, and the number here, the 1 or the 3, could be like would be formatted, and you would be able to give it within message format the same or similar set of options that you can currently give Intl.number format for formatting numbers. This, of course, would extend to all of the existing Intl formatters and how they would work.
An extension to this question. We have data, user data, where only the name is localized and everything else is a different field. If we use JSON.files today, and then we upload UDF integrally to get the correct display language, how do we, can we move on to JSON files now completely with data types that we know that needs only partial translation? So some of the fields are in English, only the name or properties, let's say, are in the localized language. Does the standard accommodate that? So anything we tagged in JSON.files, can we do that using the no messaging format? And does it behave the same way, except apply the language application?
Not quite, in that we currently are not intending, okay, so there's a specific Intl.MessageFormat proposal is likely to extend to provide 2 different JavaScript interfaces for parsing messages. One is probably going to end up as Intl.MessageFormat, which would, you would give it a string and it would be parsed as a single, the contents of a single message, like what starts with the curly brace here and ends with Suomen pääkaupunki. And a different API, probably Intl.MessageResource would be one where you could pass it a whole message format resource file, and it would construct an object, a structure out of this. So if I understand right, in your use case, you could have the data still being carried as JSON over the wire, but then when you have a single message in it, you would be able to pass that string to Intl.MessageFormat and get a formatter out of that for that message. But yeah. Anything more?
How large could these messages be? So like in this example where we have this span that is the Helsinki kind of like tag there for our ID, right? And then we're replacing pretty much everything with that from the messages.map, right? Is it, you try to keep it kind of small and contained, or like, would you not recommend going like bigger, or how I'm thinking like larger components?
I think for now we're not thinking of limiting the size of messages within the specification. I think in this world, the analogous question is, how big should an HTML page be if it's consisting of text content and so on? It may be that we'll encounter some performance reasons that will drive for a limit to be imposed at some point, but I'm not currently aware of such a limit being needed.
Thoughts about using regular expressions?
Sorry, could you rephrase the question about regular?
Yeah, are you thinking about using or supporting regular expressions, like to do the translation here?
Regular expressions for the translation.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Instead of something like static, as you have here, you can like have a regular expression replacing something by another thing.
Okay, about regular expressions using those to replace some of this. That doesn't, it's an interesting concept, but it doesn't, it's part of these. It solves many of the actual real world problems, but it doesn't solve all of them. It doesn't take into account, for instance, the sorts of structures where you want to build a number formatter out of the content in a message and an options bag of what's in there and go from there, or do selection among different variants. Or as in this case, what we're really doing is overlaying some of the values that we have in this message of the A element and in this case, the href property, and we're going to overlay them over the existing element in the DOM tree, and those values mapping to being updated. It gets complicated. The message format syntax, the draft we currently have for that is, we do have an LL1 parser for it, so it should be quite performant in what we're doing. And it's close to, not syntactically, but structurally and in thinking, it's close to what we have already now for Fluent, the language that Fluent uses and the resource format that Fluent uses, for those to be parsable roughly at the same sort of efficiency as we're parsing JSON in Firefox at this time. Not, of course, JSON parsing is somewhat optimized, but because for messages, we can actually have a much better understanding of the expectation of their shape. We can do certain optimizations for that. Yeah. You've managed to ask me so many questions. That is great. That I'm kind of hoping that this has meant that whatever, yeah, it's sounding like they're over, which means that this officially has been the last talk of this whole conference, which is kind of cool. I don't know why, but still, thank you very much for participating in it. And if you're interested, I have cool Mozilla stickers. Come, I'll be happy to give you some, but I think this is it for localization for today. Thank you.